You may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I joined the Leader of the Opposition and member for Castries East in raising some questions on the resolution which is before us. Mr. Speaker, it essentially brings into focus two issues: that of borrowing, and by extension, incurring debt, and the COVID response of this government. So in raising my issues, I shall focus on those two aspects. Like the Leader of the Opposition, I would have hoped, Mr. Speaker, and I still do hope, that we will get copies of the documents, the statement made by the Prime Minister and the documents he referred to. It is quite interesting that on a day when we come to borrow, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, member from Miko South, would present to the House statements on government's position on debt management. And essentially, debt management is a consequence of borrowing. But it was quite interesting. The last time we met in this Honorable House 2 weeks ago, we were being presented with a bill to do a finance, the management bill and the procurement bill, which we will deal with in this sitting. One of the bills had come before us in this Honorable House, and I can recall, and we will debate it later, that suggestions were made, especially by the member from Beaufort South. Some of what we discussed then had not really been followed up on, including setting up a committee to look at the bill. But the bill came back before us. And then we were told the reason why it's coming back before us is because for us to get the CDB loan, we are required, because it's a policy-based loan, to put before the House and to pass those two bills. And I listened carefully, and the Prime Minister was presenting the policy and the statement on debt management. And I'm thinking that surely this is, in theory, a very progressive move. Of course, the devil is always in the details. And then I heard he said that this government is negotiating a $40 million loan from the World Bank, and a requirement of that loan is having in place such a debt management policy, and also to make available publicly data and statistics on debt management. And my optimism fell flat, because there I thought it was really an attempt to be a progressive government and not necessarily a reactive position, because an international institution that wishes to lend money to St. Lucia require those requirements. Be that as it may, we will take it for what it is, and when we see the details, we can debate it. But of course, I ask that we pay heed to the comment made by the member from Castries East, that one should be a little cautious in how one establishes by legislation policy that will hamstring future governments, because of course we do have an election in the near future. But let's come back to the issue of borrowing by this government, because we are being asked to borrow more money. And I heard the member from Miko South said, this is repurposing a loan, that there was already an application for those monies to be used for agricultural feeder roads. And of course, the member from Castries East asked a couple of questions, and I'm sure the member from Miko South will respond appropriately. I am not against repurposing of loans. In fact, we call for it. You would recall that in March and many sittings after, we called for repurposing of loans, and we were chastised for doing so. We called for it. We said some of the loans that are before this Parliament, presented through the budgetary statement, should be repurposed. And we were told that y'all know nothing about financial management, y'all know nothing about the economy. We were chastised for asking that they be repurposed. Do you know why we were asking that those loans be repurposed? We were asking because we believed there was an urgent need in this country to pay attention to the COVID management plan and the consequences of COVID on the citizens of this country. We were saying that there is no need to go ahead with certain loans for roads, for airport redevelopment, and instead use those monies for the COVID response. We were saying use those monies to ensure that as a country we have the capacity to deal with COVID. We were calling for repurposing. We sat in this house, and those of us who stood and spoke, the IMF loan of about 70-odd million EC dollars, when we looked at the estimates as to how the monies were going to be used, relocating a garbage dam, paying for the DSH road, a number of other reasons. We said that could not be why you were going to use that money. Use it for COVID, for support for persons affected, to build our capacity. We said so. We were not listened to. And today, we have been asked to support a bill which we are told is repurposing. For me, a resolution. For me, it's too little and too late. Not that we don't need it, we do need it, but we need more than that. We need more than that, Mr. Speaker. We came into this house 2 weeks ago to borrow from the CDB, and we were told it was for COVID response. And 2 weeks later, we're back here borrowing again. We could have done all the things that we have been told this money is going to be used for with monies already borrowed, with monies that have been used for other purposes right now. You see, this government, we've always had an issue with them. Always had an issue with them. This is a government that said that they would not borrow. When in opposition, during the campaign, that they were not going to borrow. They would stop this borrowing. The Labour Party was borrowing too much. And then they got into government and they modified it and they said they would only borrow if there is a revenue stream to repay it. So, of course, the position changes. But this is a government that has, in the last 4.5 years, borrowed over $1.5 billion. This government, almost over $1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. And I can itemize, I've gone through every single item that has come before this house. And we can itemize it. You know how the member, there's a particular member who stands up every time we speak about the debt. And you know what he does? He looks at the debt in 2016, he looks at it in 2019, 20, and he subtracts it and you see that only increased by 700 million or whatever. Because he's looking at the stock and he's subtracting it. Of course, he's not saying that debts are being repaid, but we can go through it, itemize it. Itemize it. Almost 1.5 billion, I can almost tell you from my head. But we accept, Mr. Speaker, that government, Mr. Speaker, must borrow. There is no two ways about it. Government must borrow, Mr. Speaker. And there was the COVID pandemic, so you expect the government to borrow because there's a shortfall in revenue. So there has to be borrowing. But it is because of the necessity of borrowing during the pandemic and because of the uncertainty of the future that requires you to be very prudent in your borrowing. This is the imperative that says to you, if I do not need to borrow, I should not borrow. Can somebody explain to me the roundabouts at Rodney Bay? Do we need to borrow money? And don't tell me it's below the line and it is finance. It is a debt on this country. Do we need this at this point in time? Did we need to go ahead with the loan from the consortium of banks for the airport redevelopment at this time? Mr. Speaker, the spate of borrowing from this government did not slow down. It did not stop. And whereas they could have used monies, whether from the IMF, the IDA, CDB, to do the very things that they are doing today. They could have done it, Mr. Speaker, but they did not, because the pet projects, the election projects, are more important than the imperatives of national survival. I want you, Mr. Speaker, if you look at St. Lucia's Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, a document of this government, of course I like it, because in this document, you are stating to the nation what is your recovery and resilience plan. This is what you've said is, for want of a better descriptive word, your Bible for the COVID recovery. Of about $520 million, 400 are what is called shovel-ready projects. These are projects that the government already had in the pipeline that they intend to continue with. How many COVID-specific projects you see in there? How many? This was not no economic recovery and resilience plan in the true sense of one. Yes, there were activities pertaining to COVID, but essentially it was just a justification for the government to continue with business as usual, and not just as usual, to have greater latitude, because there is no tendering, there is no competitive bidding, and they can just award to the FFF. And this explains why, from the start, when we asked a few questions on the process, that we didn't want to be part of the process, because it was not a genuine process, and I'll come back to this a little later, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to ask the question, has all the borrowing we've done in this House enhanced our capacity to fight COVID? How has it really enhanced our capacity? I'm still hearing we're borrowing $20 million now, in November. Next week is December. We are now repurposing loans to finish the respiratory hospital. Let's think about that. Let's think about that. We knew from March there was a COVID pandemic. We heard experts predicting a winter second wave. We sped okay in the first stage of it, but we heard everyone saying there'll be a second and maybe even a third wave. Mr. Speaker, and we're still hearing today, about facilities we have to spend money on to establish 9 months later. And I was by the hospital yesterday and I saw VH being painted. In all my life, walking next to VH, going to Banan to buy fish and milk from Mr. Laborde and to bathe, I've never seen VH looking so bright. Just as we have left. I'm glad you're clapping. I'm glad you're clapping, because I want you to clap for my next statement. We've never seen it look this way. And it's typical of this government to mama guy. So they paint outside bright, and inside, the COVID patients are in mold-infested rooms. And you know what the Minister of Health said? All over St. Lucia have mold. So what's wrong with COVID patients being in mold-infested rooms? So you're painting outside, making it look bright and beautiful, and inside COVID patients are suffering from being put in mold-infested rooms with water on the floor. And you're telling me, and you're clapping because you painted bright and the hospital looking new, VH is new again. You must have substance, you must be genuine, you must be sincere. So I'm asking again, the borrowing that we've done, do we have more PPE? Do we have more medication for COVID patients? I'm hearing today, this money will now be used for this. That there not enough testing kits. This money will be used for this. We cannot be against that. We cannot be against it. We've been calling for it from March. We've been calling for it. Mr. Speaker, if my memory serves me right, we would have borrowed from the Exim Bank in Taiwan in the last year and a half or so, over $500 million. the airport, St. Jude, housing project, roads rehabilitation, now COVID. That's over $500 million from the Exim Bank. $500 million in about a year and a half. And they still want to deny that there is borrowing going on in this country. Every time we speak about the level of borrowing, they say that's not true, that's not true. Just the Exim Bank. Just the Exim Bank. Now, I'll tell you something. I believe it's an abuse of the friendship of the Taiwanese people and government. If we need money in this country and Taiwan is assisting us, I think we should be grateful and we should be thankful we have friends for Taiwan. But Taiwan has to know the context of this borrowing. There is a powerful statement in the context of the borrowing. A very powerful statement. Almost $500 million from the Exim Bank. But we are told this is necessary and is repurposing, and it's because of the COVID response. You would all recall where we were at the end of September. And I want to state categorically that this government's response to COVID has been disastrous. Disastrous. It has been. Disastrous. So, Mr. Speaker, at the end of September, we had about 27 cases or so. About 27 cases or so. And we heard a lot of opportunistic statements. St. Lucia is among the best in the world. I kept quiet. Kept quiet. When you have a few experiences in life, and you know and you understand, how reality unfolds. And at the last sitting here, I said, I know a basketball match has 4 quarters. You don't celebrate after the first quarter. I know a football match has 2 halves. I don't celebrate after the first half. But you strengthen your resolve. You prepare for what's ahead. This government was saying things are so good in this country because we, the government, are doing things right. And the government thanked the people of St. Lucia for cooperating with them because they are doing the right things. But now, Mr. Speaker, things are not looking so good. But you know what? It's not their fault. It's the people's fault. The people have no respect. The people have no respect. And the people must be made to pay for what's happening in this country. And don't get me vexed. You know, it's not their fault. When it was good, it was their hard work. But when it is bad, it's the fault of the people. And you hear the shouts around this morning, it's the Labour Party fault. You see, Mr. Speaker, we were first told that it was the back door that was causing it. But not one fisherman has tested positive yet. Not one. But it was the back door. And I made the comment in the last sitting that 18,000 visitors, we were told, had entered St. Lucia. Not one of them had been negative. And I made a point about law of probability. And a member shouted to me about, what's the law of probability? What probability? And I could not understand how it is 18,000 people were coming in and not one positive. But a few people may have entered for the back door. And they are the ones bringing in COVID. The CMO herself said there is no evidence, no link between the spread and back door. But they are trying to make solutions believe that it is the back door that's causing the problem. And you know, it was repeated this morning, what is most painful about the comments from members opposite is to say openly, without any shame, in this house, which is supposed to be an honorable house, that is the Labour Party supporters who are super spreaders. For me, Mr. Speaker, this is painful. Because I am a St. Lucian. And I know no St. Lucian wants another one to have COVID or to die from COVID. And to stay in this honorable house as the leaders of this country and to repeat it over and over, the member from Soufrière, the member from Ancillary, the member from Castries Southeast. The Prime Minister himself was the cheerleader that it is your Labour Party supporters that are the super spreaders and cause this spike. This, Mr. Speaker, is shameful, Mr. Speaker. It tells a lot about the character of the individuals who are saying it. We are all leaders of this country. We all have certain responsibilities, and primary among it is not stigmatizing people, Mr. Speaker. To stand up in this House and to say what they've said and to continue to repeat it. And this was a march that got approval from Commissioner of Police, Chief Medical Officer, from NEMO, from everybody. All the experts approved the march, Mr. Speaker. And then we are told that it's Labour Party people that are super spreaders. I hope when election is called and the super spreaders act, they accept the result, Mr. Speaker. I hope so. But, Mr. Speaker, they might behave like Trump, okay. Mr. Speaker, they even denied that there was ever any case at a hotel. That was denied over and over, and saying that it is Labour Party spreading those rumors. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia is a small country. We know. We're also a country that has a very powerful oral history and tradition. So things are said. They're not always true. They're not always the total truth. But there are some things that happens in this country. People know. And then a couple days ago, we had a general manager of a hotel admitting that they had a number of cases at their hotel and the stringent measures they had to put in place. And I applaud him for doing so. Because it laid bare the character of this government, that they are continuously misleading the people. So we are borrowing money for a COVID response, a COVID management that has gone astray. It has gone astray. All the boasts and proclamations they were making, where are they now? A little humility has to settle in, Mr. Speaker, because this is serious business. We've heard that there ought to be second testing. And again, the member from Miku South, the Prime Minister, insists there can be no more second testing. And Mr. Speaker, I heard a clip. The Minister of Health, the person who the COVID bill gives the authority, Mr. Speaker, to make orders, say we do second testing, we do third testing, we even do fourth testing in St. Lucia. And the question raised by the senator on the other side, on our side, flew completely over her head. She didn't even seem to appreciate what second testing was all about. Mr. Speaker, civil society is calling for second testing. And we are calling and repeating again that there must be second testing in St. Lucia. We've heard the statements made by the Prime Minister of Barbados. And I think only yesterday, the CDC in the United States suggested there should even be free tests for travelers, Mr. Speaker. So we are borrowing money. Too little, too late. Because the COVID management plan has gone astray. Mr. Speaker, we need to go back to basics. And we need to go back to this document in many ways, Mr. Speaker, for it to be reviewed and refined, Mr. Speaker. Because we have to establish as our basic guiding principle moving forward that the lives of St. Lucia must always be paramount, must always be. And the resources of the government, the monies we are borrowing, must be primarily focused on safeguarding the lives of St. Lucians, Mr. Speaker. Then, Mr. Speaker, we have to be concerned about the livelihoods of people. We need to be concerned about the quality of life that COVID has imposed. And the member from Castries East was pleading this morning. Sometimes I wonder if members opposite don't have constituents who come to them, people to say that we've not eaten for a couple of days in the house and they need some help. There are people who tell you they can't buy their medication. And I said, a lady came to me, Mr. Speaker, and it was painful. She now takes her medication every other day so it can stretch. Yeah, I know I always have a story, but these are real life stories. Real, and these are the stories that guide me, Mr. Speaker, in my decision making. So we have to be concerned, Mr. Speaker, like the member from Castries East said, about the people out there who are suffering, Mr. Speaker. There is not enough in there for these people. I am still concerned about the children who cannot be part of online learning because they have no devices. Doesn't that bother us, Mr. Speaker? I still have a list of parents and children that want tablets, Mr. Speaker, because they cannot participate in online learning. This government stopped the laptop program. We've been faced by this pandemic since March, and we are going to lose a generation of St. Lucians who would have not benefited from proper schooling and learning ever since this crisis started. No devices, no Wi-Fi in the community. What's happening to those children? And we're borrowing monies now when we could have done this some time ago. Instead, we're building the Rodney Bay roundabout. We're building roads all over Groseley. We're building all over the country, and more to be built, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not saying do not build roads, do not repair roads. I'm speaking about the balance between how much we put towards people's lives, their livelihoods, and those we put for the economic recovery and stimulation that's needed. Mr. Speaker, the member from Castro East spoke of why he signed a Recover St. Lucia document. And I've been wondering about it, Mr. Speaker, because this document and this process was supposed to produce a Recover St. Lucia plan. Because this was supposed to be private sector, public sector, civil society. And together, this was supposed to be produced. And I love this document for true, Mr. Speaker. It was supposed to be the blueprint. But yet the private sector is now coming up with its own Recover St. Lucia plan. Is that a very subtle way of telling the government that you have failed miserably? Maybe it's a subtle way of saying to them that you'll fail miserably when you prepared this plan. Because if we had done a truly national recovery and resilience plan together with the same people who are preparing this Recover St. Lucia plan, there will be no need for it. There will be no need for the Chamber of Commerce and the SLHTA to be preparing any Recover St. Lucia plan if this had been done properly. But let me just say one thing on this, Mr. Speaker. There can be no Recover St. Lucia unless we have a Unite St. Lucia. None. It will not work. Because there is a politicization of assistance under this government. And I've been saying so since March. There are people who receive foodstuff. It was politicized. Some needed it. I won't doubt that. But a lot of people who needed it did not get it. We know from the week of the lockdown what happened in the distribution of the massive food bags. We know what happened. Some constituencies were made to suffer. I know in my constituency we got nothing until the 6th day. I was lucky. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are people who were driving around distributing meals. And it was politicized. There are contracts being given all over my constituency. All over. Politicize the assistance. Return to school. Politicize, Mr. Speaker. And I hear in this borrowing, there'll be money to help vulnerable families. Should I have confidence that it will not be politicized again? Should I? There are people doing small projects all over the constituency. And Mr. Speaker, even before we came to Parliament on this, I had gotten a CPC on it. Somebody was trying to discuss how they're going to fix the Cicero playing field, blah, blah, blah. And they're supposed to be squeezed out of this. Election projects, Mr. Speaker. Election projects. And you're asking me, Mr. Speaker, to have confidence in this government. We need, Mr. Speaker, at this point, when we are borrowing monies and talking about COVID response, we have to bring this country together. We have to press that reset button. I've said so. I always believe, and I'm a person who loves a good debate, a good argument, but And we need to do so as politicians, debate the issues. But there are people's lives involved, Mr. Speaker. There are people suffering in this country. There are fishermen and farmers and bus drivers and people in the creative industries that are suffering in this country. And Christmas is coming. And the anxiety level is rising, the frustration is rising, Mr. Speaker, because these people do not know what kind of Christmas they will spend. And the little that we're going to get is being politicized. There is no conscience in this government. None. No conscience. It's going to get worse, Mr. Speaker. And you know why it's going to get worse? As they go on the ground and they feel the wrath of the people, the nepotism will rise. The politicization will rise because they will be in survival mode now. Because the people will be showing them that they are rising against what they're doing. And money will become the order of the day. Money. Buy people loyalty. Because they know the people are suffering. They know it, Mr. Speaker. And you're asking me to repurpose $20 million, Mr. Speaker? 20 million? Given the state of this country right now, because of the effect of COVID, 20 million, now you want to repurpose? Now? This is too little, too late, Mr. Speaker. I want to end, Mr. Speaker, by saying, I cannot in principle call for repurposing, and when it is done, to oppose it. I believe the people of St. Lucia need support. The struggling people need support. The starving people need support. The school children need support. But I have no confidence in this government. They've taken too long to take this first step, and it is not a giant enough step. We need more support for our people in St. Lucia. And I want to end by making an appeal to members on the other side. Do not continue to go down that road of stigmatizing St. Lucians because they do not support your party. It is shameful as parliamentary representatives to be in this house and to be shouting and almost seem to be celebrating a belief, a malicious belief, a constructed belief that Labour Party supporters are super spreaders. And then you want this country to unite behind you, unite behind your initiative, unite behind a national endeavor to fight COVID. How can it be achieved? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.